My stepsister removed every photo of my dead mother and me from my dad's house. I gave him a photo album at his 60th birthday in front of everyone. My dad remarried when I was 19 and already living on my own. His new wife Gloria seemed nice enough, and I was happy he found someone after being alone for 6 years since my mom passed. Gloria had a daughter named Waverly who was 2 years younger than me. I tried to be welcoming because I knew blending families was hard. Waverly didn't try at all. From the first family dinner, Waverly made it clear she didn't consider me real family. She talked over me constantly. She corrected things I said even when I was right. She made comments about how she finally had a father figure since her own dad left when she was little. She acted like my dad was hers now and I was just some person from his past who occasionally showed up. I didn't live at home anymore, so I told myself it didn't matter. I visited every few weeks for dinner and holidays. I smiled through Waverly's attitude and focused on spending time with my dad. He was happy with Gloria, and that was what mattered. I could handle an annoying stepsister for a few hours at a time. Then I noticed the photos. My dad's house used to be filled with pictures of me growing up. My school photos on the hallway wall. My graduation picture on the mantle. Candid shots of me and my dad fishing, camping, celebrating birthdays. Photos of my mom before she got sick. Those pictures had been there my entire life. They were part of the house as much as the walls themselves. The first time I noticed something was off, 2 of my school photos were missing from the hallway. I asked my dad about it and he looked confused. He said Gloria must have moved them while redecorating. I found them in a box in the garage. I put them back up myself. A month later, they were gone again. This time 3 more photos had disappeared too. I found them in the same box, now joined by my graduation picture and 2 photos of my mom. I confronted my dad directly. He said he didn't know what was happening, but he'd talked to Gloria. Nothing changed. Every visit, more photos vanished. The fishing trip pictures, the camping memories, my 5th birthday party, my first day of school. One by one, my entire childhood was being erased from the walls of my father's house. Meanwhile, photos of Waverly started appearing everywhere. Her senior portraits replaced mine in the hallway. Her college acceptance celebration took the spot on the mantle where my graduation photo used to sit. Her childhood pictures filled frames that used to hold images of me and my mom. The house I grew up in was becoming a shrine to someone who'd lived there for less than 2 years. I knew it was Waverly. Gloria was too gentle to do something this cruel, and my dad was too oblivious to notice the changes happening gradually. Waverly was methodically removing me from the family home and replacing me with herself. When I finally confronted her, she didn't even deny it. She said the house felt cluttered with old photos everywhere. She said it was weird for her mom to live surrounded by pictures of my dad's dead wife. She said I didn't even live there anymore, so why did I need photos on the walls? She said her family lived there now, and the house should reflect that. I asked what she did with my mom's photos. She shrugged and said they were somewhere in the garage. She said I could take them if I wanted since nobody else needed them. I went to my dad and told him everything. I told him Waverly had been systematically removing every trace of me and my mother from his house. I told him she admitted it to my face without any shame. I asked him to do something about it. He looked uncomfortable. He said he didn't want to cause drama with Gloria. He said Waverly was young and still adjusting. He said maybe I was being too sensitive about old photos. He said the past was the past, and we all needed to move forward as a new family. That was when I realized my dad wasn't going to protect my place in his life. He was going to let Waverly erase me because it was easier than having a difficult conversation with his new wife. So I stopped waiting for him to fix things. I fixed them myself. I started by taking back what was mine. Every photo of me and my mom that Waverly had thrown in the garage came home with me. I didn't ask permission. I just loaded them into my car during a Sunday dinner while everyone was eating dessert. Waverly noticed when she went to the garage for something and found the boxes empty. She came back inside demanding to know where everything went. I told her I took what nobody else wanted since she made it clear those photos didn't belong in this house anymore. She complained to my dad and Gloria. My dad looked relieved that he didn't have to deal with it anymore. Gloria looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Waverly fumed but couldn't argue since she was the one who said I could have them. Then I started being less available. I stopped answering his calls. The first time he phoned after I took the photos, I let it go to voicemail. He said he wanted to check in and see how I was doing. His voice sounded confused, like he couldn't understand why I wasn't responding. The second call came 3 days later. He asked if I wanted to come over for dinner on Sunday. I texted back saying I had plans. The third call happened a week after that. He left a longer message this time, saying Gloria was making my favorite pot roast and they really hoped I could make it. I replied that work was busy and I couldn't commit to anything right now. Each excuse felt like putting up a shield between me and the hurt of watching Waverly erase me while he did nothing. By the 4th week, his messages started sounding worried instead of just confused. He asked if everything was okay and if he'd done something wrong. I almost laughed when I heard that one. Almost. At work, I kept messing up simple things. I forgot to send an email to a client. I scheduled a meeting for the wrong time. I stared at my computer screen without actually seeing anything on it. Lana noticed during our lunch break on a Tuesday. We were sitting in the break room with our sandwiches when she put her hand on my arm and asked what was going on. I tried to brush it off at first, saying I was just tired. She gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it, so I told her everything. About the photos disappearing one by one, about finding them in boxes in the garage like trash, about Waverly admitting she threw them away because nobody needed them, about my dad refusing to do anything because he didn't want drama with his new wife. Lana's face got red while I talked. When I finished, she actually raised her voice, which she never does. She said it was cruel and wrong and my dad should be ashamed of himself for letting it happen. Hearing her get angry on my behalf made something tight in my chest loosen a little. She said I wasn't overreacting or being too sensitive. She said anyone would be hurt by what happened. Saturday morning, I was still in my pajamas when someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw my dad standing there. My stomach dropped. I thought about not answering, but he knocked again and called my name. I opened the door and he looked terrible. His hair was messy and he had dark circles under his eyes. He asked if he could come in. I stepped aside and let him walk past me into the living room. He turned around and asked why I'd been avoiding the family. I crossed my arms and told him I couldn't keep coming over to watch Waverly erase me from his life while he stood by and let it happen. He opened his mouth to say something, but I kept going. I told him it hurt too much to be in that house and see all my memories gone, replaced by someone who made it clear she didn't want me there. He started with the same excuses. He said Waverly was young and still adjusting to the new family situation. He said blending families took time and patience. I cut him off before he could finish. I told him she admitted everything to my face without any guilt or remorse. She said nobody needed those photos. She threw away pictures of my dead mother like they were garbage. I told him his refusal to do anything about it made me feel like I didn't matter anymore. Like he'd rather keep his new wife happy than protect my place in his life. My voice cracked when I said that last part, but I didn't cry. He looked like I'd slapped him. His face went pale and he sat down on my couch without asking. He put his head in his hands and stayed quiet for a long minute. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been trying to avoid conflict and didn't realize how much damage he was causing. He promised he'd talk to Gloria seriously this time and make sure things changed. I sat down in the chair across from him and told him I'd heard that promise before. I needed to see actual change, not just words. I needed him to stand up for me and my mom's memory instead of taking the easy way out. He nodded and said he understood. He asked if I would give him a chance to fix things. I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said I would wait and see what he actually did. He stood up and hugged me before he left. It was a long hug, the kind he used to give me when I was little and scared of something. After he walked out, I stood in my living room feeling guilty and relieved at the same time. Guilty for making him feel bad. Relieved that I'd finally said everything I needed to say. I called Evangeline right away. She answered on the second ring and I asked if she could come over. She showed up 40 minutes later with 2 bottles of wine and a bag of chips. We sat on my couch and I told her everything that happened with my dad. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished talking, she poured us both more wine and said I did the right thing by being honest. For the next 2 hours, I vented about everything. About feeling erased. About being scared my dad was choosing his new family over me. About missing my mom and wishing she was here to tell me what to do. Evangeline just listened and nodded and refilled my glass when it got empty. Before she left, she suggested something I hadn't thought about. She said maybe I should talk to a therapist about all of this. She said losing my mom and now feeling pushed out of my dad's life was complicated grief that might help to work through with a professional. She gave me the name of someone she'd seen after her parents got divorced. She said the therapist really helped her understand that she wasn't responsible for fixing everyone else's problems. I took the name and put it in my phone. After Evangeline left, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about whether I was ready to talk to a stranger about all this pain I'd been carrying. The next week, I made an appointment with the therapist. Her name was Dr. Sparks and her office was in a building downtown. I felt nervous walking in for the first session. I'd never done therapy before and didn't know what to expect. Dr. Sparks was younger than I thought she'd be, maybe in her late 30s, with kind eyes and a calm voice. She asked me to tell her what brought me in. I started talking, and once I started, I couldn't stop. I told her about my mom dying when I was 19, about my dad remarrying, about Waverly removing every photo of me and my mother from the house, about my dad refusing to do anything to stop it. Dr. Sparks listened and took notes and asked questions that made me think. By the end of the hour, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I'd been holding back so much anger because I didn't want anyone to think I was against my dad being happy. I'd been swallowing my hurt and pretending everything was fine when nothing was fine at all. Dr. Sparks helped me see that protecting my mother's memory and wanting my place in the family wasn't the same thing as rejecting Gloria and Waverly. She said I had a right to exist in my father's life and home. She said setting boundaries wasn't mean or selfish. It was healthy and necessary. I left that first session feeling like someone had given me permission to stop pretending I was okay. On the drive home, I cried, but it was a different kind of crying than before. It felt like letting something go instead of holding it in. 2 weeks went by with no word from my dad. No calls, no texts, no messages asking me to come to dinner. At first, I thought maybe he was giving me space. Then I started wondering if he'd decided it was easier to just let me drift away. That thought hurt worse than anything else. I kept checking my phone, hoping to see his name pop up, hoping he'd prove me wrong by actually doing something about the situation instead of just promising to. Every day that passed without hearing from him felt like proof that I'd been right. He wasn't going to fight for me. He was going to choose the easier path and let Waverly have what she wanted. I tried to focus on work and my own life, but the silence from him sat heavy in my chest like a stone I couldn't cough up. Gloria's name showed up on my phone screen 3 days later. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering, because I couldn't figure out why she would call me directly instead of having my dad do it. She asked if I had time to meet for coffee that week, and her voice sounded careful, like she was trying not to say the wrong thing. I told her yes, even though I wasn't sure what this was about. We agreed to meet at a place halfway between our houses on Saturday morning. I spent the next few days wondering what she wanted to talk about without my dad or Waverly there to hear it. Saturday came and I got to the coffee shop first. I ordered my drink and sat at a table near the window where I could watch the parking lot. Gloria pulled in 10 minutes later, driving her silver car. She walked inside and spotted me right away. She looked nervous when she sat down across from me. Her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed something to hold on to. She thanked me for meeting her, and then she just started talking. She said my dad finally explained everything to her about the photos and what Waverly had been doing for months. She looked me in the eye and said she was horrified when she realized how much her daughter had removed from the house. She said she didn't know it had gotten that bad because she wasn't paying attention to what Waverly was doing. Gloria kept talking, and I could tell this was hard for her to say. She apologized for not noticing sooner. She said she was so focused on making her new marriage work and keeping everyone happy that she missed what was happening right in front of her. She admitted she should have been watching Waverly more closely because blending families was complicated and required actual effort from everyone. She asked me what she could do to make things better between us and fix what her daughter had broken. Her face looked sincere when she said it. I believed she meant it. I told her I appreciated the apology and I could tell she was being honest with me. But I also told her the truth about where we stood now. The photos were gone from my dad's house because I took them all back to my apartment. They were in boxes in my closet and on my own walls now. I explained that even if we tried to put them back up at Dad's house, I couldn't trust they would stay there. Waverly had proven she would just remove them again the second nobody was looking. I said I wasn't willing to go through that cycle anymore, where I kept finding my family memories thrown in the garage like trash. Gloria surprised me by nodding and saying she understood completely. She said she didn't blame me one bit for protecting what was mine. She leaned forward a little and her voice got quieter. She told me that Waverly had always struggled with jealousy ever since she was little. She said her daughter felt like she had to compete for attention and approval constantly. She admitted that losing her own father when she was young made Waverly desperate to claim my dad as hers alone. Gloria said that didn't excuse the behavior, but it helped explain where it came from. She looked tired when she said it, like this was something she'd been dealing with for years. I decided to ask the question that had been bothering me since this whole thing started. I asked Gloria directly if she was bothered by my mom's photos being displayed in the house when she first moved in. I needed to know if Waverly was acting on her own, or if Gloria had wanted those pictures gone too. Gloria shook her head immediately. She said she knew exactly what she was marrying into when she said yes to my dad. She said she never expected him to erase his past or pretend my mom never existed. She told me she thought it was healthy that he kept those memories visible because it showed he was capable of real love. She said she wasn't threatened by a woman who passed away years ago. We kept talking and the conversation went on for over an hour. We covered everything from how the marriage started to what living with Waverly was really like day to day. Gloria told me stories about her daughter's behavior that made it clear this wasn't just about me. Waverly had jealousy issues with other people too. I started seeing Gloria as her own person, separate from what her daughter had done. She was genuinely trying to make this blended family work, even though her daughter was making it nearly impossible. That effort mattered to me even if the situation was still broken. Before we left, Gloria brought up my dad's 60th birthday. She said it was coming up in 2 months and they were planning a party at the house. She asked if I would come and be part of the celebration. I told her I needed to think about it because I wasn't sure I was ready to walk back into that house and pretend everything was fine. She said she understood and she wouldn't pressure me either way. We hugged in the parking lot before getting in our separate cars. It felt weird but also good to have actually talked to her like real people, instead of just being polite strangers at family dinners. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the birthday party. I went to my closet and pulled out the boxes of photos I'd rescued from the garage. I sat on my bedroom floor and started going through them one by one. I really looked at them this time instead of just grabbing them and running. There were so many moments captured in these pictures. My 5th birthday with the homemade cake my mom decorated. The camping trip where my dad taught me to fish. My first day of kindergarten standing on the front porch. My mom laughing at something off camera before she got sick. My high school graduation with both my parents beaming in the audience. Every single memory that Waverly had decided didn't matter enough to keep on the walls. I spread the photos out on my carpet and they covered almost the entire floor. Looking at them all together like this made me realize just how much of my life Waverly had tried to throw away. These weren't just old pictures taking up space like she claimed. These were proof that I existed in my dad's life long before she showed up. These were proof that my mom was real and loved, and part of our family story. An idea started forming in my head while I sat there surrounded by all those memories. It started small, but grew bigger the more I thought about it. What if I made a photo album for my dad's birthday that told the whole story Waverly tried to erase? What if I gave him back all these memories in a way he couldn't ignore or let disappear again? I picked up my phone and called Evangeline. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear music playing in the background. I told her about the photo album idea, and she got quiet for a second before saying it was perfect. She said it wasn't petty or mean. It was just showing the truth that Waverly tried to hide. She offered to help me organize everything and make it look really professional so nobody could dismiss it as just me being emotional. I felt relieved hearing her support because part of me worried the whole thing was too much. We made plans to start working on it that weekend at my apartment. Saturday morning, Evangeline showed up with her laptop and a bunch of supplies she bought at the craft store. We spread all the photos across my living room floor and started sorting them by year. There were way more than I remembered. Pictures from every birthday, every school year, family trips to the lake, camping in the mountains, Christmas mornings, my mom smiling in the kitchen, my dad teaching me to ride a bike, the two of them dancing at some party. Evangeline kept picking up photos and asking me about them, and I found myself telling stories I hadn't thought about in years. Around noon, her mom, Lucille, stopped by to drop off lunch and ended up staying. She sat down on the floor with us and started looking through the photos too. Lucille asked what we were doing, and Evangeline explained the whole situation with Waverly and the birthday album plan. Lucille got this look on her face that reminded me she went through her own blended family stuff when Evangeline's dad remarried. She told us about how her ex-husband's new wife tried to act like Lucille never existed, and how hard that was for Evangeline as a kid. She said making my presence visible wasn't cruel at all. She said families that pretend the past didn't exist never build real trust because everyone knows the truth is being hidden. She looked right at me and said my dad needed to see what he'd been allowing to disappear. Hearing that from someone who actually lived through similar stuff made me feel like I wasn't crazy for doing this. We kept working, and I started thinking about how I wanted to present the album at the party. It needed to happen in front of everyone, so my dad couldn't just brush it off like he did with everything else. The extended family needed to see what had been erased from his house. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone or start a fight. I just wanted people to remember that I existed in my dad's life before Gloria and Waverly showed up. I wanted them to see my mom was a real person who mattered and deserved to be remembered. Evangeline said we should get a really nice leather album, something that looked expensive and thoughtful, so nobody could say I threw it together last minute out of spite. We spent an hour looking at options online and found this beautiful dark brown leather one with gold corners. I ordered it with express shipping. Over the next few days, we worked on organizing the photos in chronological order and writing little captions for each one. My 5th birthday party with the homemade cake. First day of kindergarten on the front porch. Family camping trip to Yellowstone. My mom before she got sick. Laughing at something off camera. My high school graduation with both my parents in the audience. Some recent pictures of just me and my dad from the past year. Evangeline helped me arrange everything so it told a complete story of our relationship from when I was little until now. My mom's pictures were included naturally as part of our family history, not hidden away like they didn't matter. Each page we finished felt like taking back a piece of myself that Waverly tried to throw away. The work became sort of healing in a weird way. Every photo I placed in the album was me refusing to be erased. Every caption I wrote was me saying I belonged in this family and my history mattered. I wasn't asking permission anymore or waiting for my dad to fix things. I was fixing them myself by making sure everyone could see the truth. Evangeline noticed I seemed calmer as we worked, and she was right. I felt like I was doing something instead of just being hurt and angry. My dad called me twice during those weeks. The first time he asked if I wanted to come over for dinner, and I said I was busy with work. The second time he asked if everything was okay because I seemed distant. I told him everything was fine and kept the conversation short. I didn't mention the album because I wanted it to be a complete surprise. He needed to open it in front of the whole family and see what had been taken from his walls. If I told him ahead of time, he might try to talk me out of it or prepare some excuse. My phone buzzed one afternoon with a text from Waverly. The message said her mom told her she needed to apologize for removing the photos. She said she was sorry if I felt hurt by what she did. The whole thing was so obviously forced. Gloria must have made her send it because the words didn't sound anything like Waverly. There was no actual acknowledgement that what she did was wrong, just sorry if I felt hurt, like my feelings were the problem instead of her actions. She probably typed it while rolling her eyes, and then went back to whatever she was doing without thinking about it again. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to type back something angry about how fake her apology was, but I didn't respond at all. I was done accepting half-hearted apologies that didn't mean anything. I was done pretending things were fine when nothing had actually changed. Waverly still thought she had the right to erase me from my dad's house, and my only problem was being too sensitive about it. A text message Gloria forced her to send wasn't going to fix that. I deleted the message and went back to working on the album. 3 weeks before the party, my phone buzzed with a text from Gloria. She asked if I was coming to Dad's birthday and if I wanted to bring anyone. I stared at the message for a minute before responding. I confirmed I'd be there and mentioned I was bringing Evangeline for moral support. Gloria sent back a smiley face emoji and said she was glad I'd be there. I wondered if she knew what I was planning or if she just thought I was bringing a friend to make family gatherings less awkward. Either way, I appreciated that she was trying to include me. The text made everything feel more real. I was actually going to do this in front of the whole family. I was going to hand my dad a photo album filled with all the memories Waverly tried to erase, and everyone would see what had been taken from the walls of his house. The next therapy session came at the right time because I was starting to feel nervous about how public this whole thing was. I sat in the familiar chair across from the therapist and admitted I was second-guessing myself. She asked what I was worried about specifically. I told her I was afraid people would think I was trying to cause drama or embarrass Waverly in front of everyone. She nodded and asked if that was my goal. I said no, but I couldn't deny there was some satisfaction in knowing Waverly would have to face what she did publicly. The therapist leaned forward and asked me directly if this was about healing or revenge. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I told her it was about healing because I needed my dad to see what he'd been allowing to disappear. I needed him to understand that his past with me and my mom mattered and shouldn't be hidden away to make his new family comfortable. The therapist agreed that was different from revenge. She said making my presence visible wasn't cruel. It was necessary. She reminded me that I had a right to exist in my father's life and home. By the end of the session, I felt more confident about the birthday party. This wasn't about hurting anyone. This was about refusing to be erased. A few days later, my phone rang with a call from Uncle Paul. He was Dad's younger brother, and we'd always gotten along well, even though I didn't see him as often as I'd like. He called to catch up and mentioned he was planning to come to Dad's birthday party. I asked him if he remembered all the photos that used to be in Dad's house from when I was growing up. Paul said of course he remembered them. He used to joke about how Dad had turned the hallway into a shrine to my childhood. I took a breath and asked if he'd noticed they were gone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Paul said he had noticed last time he visited and thought it was strange but didn't want to bring it up. He figured maybe Dad had redecorated or put them in storage for some reason. I explained what had actually happened. I told him about Waverly systematically removing every photo of me and my mom and replacing them with pictures of herself. I told him about finding everything in boxes in the garage and how Dad refused to do anything about it. Paul got quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight. He said he was glad I was doing something about it. He said he'd worried Dad was erasing his past to make Gloria comfortable, and it had bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Paul kept talking, and I could hear the concern in his voice. He said he'd been worried about how all of this affected me, but didn't know how to bring it up without seeming like he was interfering in Dad's new marriage. He admitted he'd noticed I'd been coming around less and wondered if it was related to the changes in the house. I confirmed that it was. Paul told me he understood why I'd pulled back and said he didn't blame me at all. He said watching Dad let Waverly erase me from the family home had been difficult for him to witness as my uncle. He'd wanted to say something but didn't know if it was his place. Hearing that I had family support made me feel stronger about what I was planning. I told Paul about the photo album I was making for Dad's birthday and what it would contain. He was quiet again, and then said he thought it was perfect. He said sometimes people needed to see the truth laid out clearly before they could acknowledge what they'd been allowing to happen. Knowing Paul understood and approved of what I was doing gave me the confidence I needed to follow through. 1 week before the party, Evangeline texted me that the album was ready for pickup. We drove to the professional printer she'd found through a friend who did wedding photography. The woman behind the counter brought out a large wrapped package and set it on the counter carefully. I unwrapped it slowly, and my breath caught when I saw the finished product. The leather cover was beautiful and substantial, clearly made with care. I opened it and flipped through the pages we'd designed together. Every photo was crisp and perfectly placed. The captions we'd written told the story of my relationship with Dad from my earliest memories to recent pictures. My mom was included naturally throughout as part of our family history. The whole thing looked professional and intentional, not thrown together or petty. Evangeline squeezed my shoulder and said it was perfect. I paid for the album and held it carefully as we walked back to the car. This was really happening. In 1 week, I was going to hand this to my dad in front of everyone at his birthday party. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the album open in front of me. I'd bought a nice pen and thought carefully about what to write on the first page. The inscription needed to set the right tone for everything that followed. I wanted it to be sincere and loving, not angry or accusatory. After several drafts on scratch paper, I wrote carefully on the first page, "To Dad on your 60th birthday. A celebration of the family we've been and the memories we've built together. Love, always." I read it over several times. It was perfect because it was true. This album was a celebration of our relationship and our history. The fact that it also showed what had been removed from his walls was just the truth telling itself. I closed the album and wrapped it carefully in birthday paper I'd picked up earlier. The gift was ready. Now I just had to get through the next week without losing my nerve. Evangeline came over a few days later and we practiced what I would say when I presented the gift. I wanted to be gracious and warm when I gave it to Dad. The photos themselves would tell the story of what had been taken from his house. I didn't need to make accusations or point fingers. Evangeline played the role of various family members watching, and we rehearsed different reactions. She reminded me to stay calm no matter what Waverly said or how she reacted. The goal was to give Dad something meaningful that happened to also show everyone what had been erased. We went through it several times until I felt comfortable with what I planned to say. Evangeline made me promise I wouldn't let anyone make me feel guilty for giving my dad a photo album of our life together. She said I had every right to celebrate my relationship with him and my mom's memory. The night before the party, I barely slept. I kept second-guessing whether this was the right approach. Maybe I should just talk to Dad privately instead of doing this publicly. Maybe I was being too dramatic or vindictive. But then I'd remember Waverly's face when she told me nobody needed my mom's photos. I'd remember her casual cruelty when she said I didn't live there anymore. So why did I need pictures on the walls? I'd remember my dad's relief when I took all the photos away myself, so he didn't have to deal with the conflict. Every time I started to lose my nerve, I reminded myself why I was doing this. My dad needed to see what he'd been allowing to disappear. He needed to face it publicly because private conversations hadn't changed anything. I deserved to exist in his life, and my mom deserved to be remembered. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted but determined. This was happening. The morning of the party, I stood in front of my closet trying to decide what to wear. I finally chose a dress my mom had always loved, a simple blue one that she said brought out my eyes. I put it on and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like someone who belonged at her father's birthday party. I looked like someone who had every right to give him a meaningful gift. My phone buzzed with a text from Evangeline saying she was on her way. I grabbed the wrapped album and waited by the door. When she pulled up, I got in the passenger seat and she immediately started giving me a pep talk. She reminded me that standing up for myself with dignity was not the same as causing drama. She said giving my dad a photo album of our life together was a completely normal and loving thing to do. If it happened to also show what had been removed from his house, that was just the truth making itself visible. She squeezed my hand and said she was proud of me for refusing to be erased. I held the album in my lap as we drove toward Dad's house. My heart was pounding, but I felt ready. This was my family too, and I wasn't going to disappear quietly. We pulled up to the house and I saw the balloons first. Big silver ones spelling out 60 floated against the garage door. A banner stretched across the porch said happy birthday in bright blue letters. Cars lined both sides of the street and filled the driveway. Through the front windows, I could see people moving around inside. Lots of them. My stomach tightened. Evangeline parked down the block and turned off the engine. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I grabbed the album from the back seat and took a breath. The wrapping paper crinkled under my fingers as I held it against my chest. We walked up the driveway together, and I could hear voices and laughter coming from inside. Gloria must have invited everyone. I recognized my aunt's car and my cousin's truck. This was bigger than I expected. Evangeline rang the doorbell even though we could have just walked in. I needed that extra second. Gloria opened the door with a huge smile. She pulled me into a hug before I could say anything. She smelled like vanilla, and her sweater was soft against my cheek. She told me she was so happy I came and held the door wide. The house was packed. People filled the living room and spilled into the kitchen. I spotted aunts and uncles I hadn't seen since Christmas. My cousin Johnny waved from across the room. Dad's friend Roger stood by the fireplace holding a beer. Then I saw my dad. He was talking to someone near the window, but he looked up right when I walked in. His whole face changed. He lit up like I'd given him the best gift already just by showing up. He crossed the room in 4 big steps and wrapped me in a hug that lifted me off my feet a little. He held on tight and I felt him breathe out against my hair. He whispered right in my ear that he was really glad I came. His voice cracked on the word glad. I could hear how worried he'd been that I might skip this, that I might decide our relationship wasn't worth showing up for anymore. I hugged him back and told him happy birthday. When he let go, his eyes were shiny. Gloria took our coats and Evangeline followed her to put them somewhere. I stood there holding the album and trying to get my bearings. The house looked the same, but different. Waverly's photos still covered the walls where mine used to be. The mantel held her college acceptance picture in the frame that used to display my graduation. But today there were decorations everywhere that made it harder to notice what was missing. I saw Gloria across the room and went over to say hello properly. She squeezed my arm and said she was glad I could make it. Her smile seemed real, genuine, like she actually wanted me here. Waverly stood near the kitchen talking to someone I didn't recognize. She glanced over when I walked in but looked away immediately. She didn't come over, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me at all. That was fine. I wasn't here for her. I was here for my dad and for myself. Evangeline came back and stood next to me. She scanned the room and then leaned close to whisper that I could do this. I nodded. My aunt came over and asked where I'd been hiding. She said she hadn't seen me in months. I told her work had been crazy and left it at that. She didn't push. My uncle asked about my apartment and whether I was still at the same place. I answered and kept things light. People kept coming up to talk. My cousin asked about my car. Dad's friend asked if I was seeing anyone. Normal birthday party questions. Normal family small talk. I moved through it all with the album tucked under my arm. Nobody asked what it was. For the first hour, I just existed in the space. I talked to relatives and ate chips and drank soda. Several people mentioned they hadn't seen me at family dinners lately. I said I'd been busy. They nodded like that explained everything. I watched Waverly avoid me from across the room. She talked to everyone else but never looked my way. Gloria kept checking on me like she was worried I might leave. Dad stayed close. He kept finding reasons to stand near me or touch my shoulder when he walked past, like he was making sure I was really there. Then Gloria announced it was time for cake. Everyone moved into the living room. People grabbed chairs or stood along the walls. Dad sat in the big armchair near the fireplace. Gloria brought out a chocolate cake with candles already lit. Everyone sang happy birthday while Dad smiled and looked embarrassed. He blew out the candles and people clapped. Gloria started bringing out presents from a table by the window. I positioned myself near the fireplace where everyone could see me. Evangeline stood against the wall behind me, and when I glanced back, she nodded. Gloria handed Dad a big box first. He opened it and pulled out a set of golf clubs. Everyone made appreciative noises. He thanked Gloria and kissed her cheek. Waverly gave him a bottle of expensive whiskey. He held it up and people laughed about him being old enough to need the good stuff now. My aunt and uncle gave him a gift card to his favorite restaurant. My cousin gave him a card with cash inside. Dad opened each present slowly and thanked everyone. The room felt relaxed, happy. People were smiling and making jokes. Nobody expected anything unusual. I waited until he'd opened everything else. Then I stepped forward. The room got quieter. People noticed me moving. I held out the wrapped album and told him I made something special for his milestone birthday. My voice came out steady. Dad looked surprised but pleased. He took the album carefully like it might break. The wrapping paper was thick and he peeled the tape slowly. People watched. I could feel Evangeline behind me. Dad got the paper off and set it aside. He opened the album cover. The room went completely silent. I watched his face. He stared at the first page for a long moment. My inscription sat there in my handwriting. To Dad on your 60th birthday. A celebration of the family we've been and the memories we've built together. Love always. He touched the words with his finger. Then he turned the page. His expression changed. His eyebrows pulled together and his mouth opened slightly. He turned another page. And another. People started leaning in to see what he was looking at. My aunt moved closer. Uncle Paul stood up from his chair. I heard quiet reactions. Someone said, "Oh." Someone else made a soft sound. Uncle Paul caught my eye from across the room. He nodded once. Slow and deliberate. Like he understood exactly what I'd done and why. Dad kept turning pages. His hands shook a little. Page after page of photos. Me as a baby in my mom's arms. Me and Dad fishing when I was 7. My mom before she got sick. Smiling at the camera. My 10th birthday party. My first day of high school. The camping trip when I was 12. My graduation. All of it. Everything that used to hang on these walls. Everything that had been erased. Dad's eyes filled with tears. They spilled over and ran down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. He just kept turning pages and crying silently. The whole room watched. Nobody spoke. Finally, he looked up at me. His face was wet, and his voice broke when he said he didn't realize how much was missing until he saw it all together like this. I looked around the room and watched faces change as people leaned in to see what Dad was holding. Gloria stood behind him with her hand on his shoulder. Her expression shifted from curious to something else as she started to understand what the album contained. She looked at page after page of photos that used to hang in this house. Photos she'd been living with for 2 years without realizing they were disappearing. Her face went pale and she glanced at Waverly. Waverly had moved back against the wall like she wanted to blend into it. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest and she stared at the floor. She wouldn't look at anyone. The room stayed quiet except for Dad turning pages. People kept moving closer to see. My aunt leaned over Dad's shoulder. My uncle stood up from his chair and walked over. Cousins crowded around. Everyone could see what I'd put together. Every photo told a story about what this house used to look like before Waverly decided I didn't belong here anymore. Dad closed the album carefully and set it on his lap. He stood up and walked straight to me. He pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. He kept saying thank you over and over against my hair. His voice cracked and I felt him shaking. He stepped back but kept his hands on my shoulders. He turned to face everyone in the room. He held up the album and told them this was the best gift he'd ever received. He said he was sorry he let these memories get put away. He said he didn't realize how much he'd lost until he saw it all together like this. His voice got louder when he said the last part. He looked at Gloria when he said it. Then he looked at Waverly. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Gabriella spoke up from the couch. She said she'd been wondering what happened to all the family photos. She said she noticed the house felt different the last few times she visited, but she couldn't figure out why. Now she understood. Other relatives started murmuring. My cousin said she remembered the fishing pictures that used to be in the hallway. My uncle mentioned the photos of my mom that used to sit on the bookshelf. Everyone was looking at Waverly now. She kept her eyes down, but her face had gone from pale to red. The social pressure in the room was thick enough to touch. Gloria moved away from Dad and walked over to Waverly. She put her hand on Waverly's arm and spoke quietly, but everyone could hear her. She said they needed to talk later. Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before, firm and serious. Not angry, but definitely not gentle. Waverly nodded without looking up. She looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. I felt satisfaction settle in my chest, but it wasn't cruel. It was just relief that people finally saw what had been happening. The party started moving again, but the energy had completely shifted. People went back to their conversations, but they kept drifting over to look at the album. Dad sat down with it, and family members took turns sitting next to him and going through pages. They shared memories about the photos. Remember when you caught that huge fish? Remember that camping trip when it rained for 3 days straight? Remember your mom's smile? Dad kept the album close to him like he was afraid it might disappear if he let go. He touched the pages gently and listened to everyone's stories. Uncle Paul pulled me aside into the hallway while everyone else was distracted. He told me I did the right thing. He said Dad needed to face what he'd been allowing to happen. Sometimes people need to see the truth laid out clearly before they can acknowledge it. He squeezed my shoulder and said he was proud of me for standing up for myself and for my mom's memory. Roger came over a few minutes later while I was getting a glass of water in the kitchen. He's been Dad's friend since college, and he knows this house almost as well as family. He mentioned that he noticed the house looked different the last time he visited. He said it felt wrong somehow, but he didn't want to say anything because it wasn't his place. He told me quietly that he was glad I spoke up in my own way. He said some things need to be said even when they're uncomfortable. The party started winding down around 8. People were gathering their things and saying goodbye. Dad came over to where I was standing with Evangeline. He still had the album in his hands. He asked if he could make copies of some of the photos. He wanted to put them back up in the house where they belonged. I told him I'd already thought of that. I went out to my car and brought in a box I'd left in the trunk. Inside were duplicate prints of every photo in the album. I'd had them made at the same time I put the album together. I told him he could put them back up wherever he wanted. Gloria came over when she saw the box. She said immediately that the photos should definitely go back up. She offered to help arrange them this weekend. She looked at me when she said it, and her expression was apologetic. Waverly stood across the room watching, but she didn't say anything. She didn't object or argue. She just stood there looking defeated. She knew she'd lost this battle, and everyone had witnessed it. Before Evangeline and I left, Dad pulled me aside into his office. He closed the door and we stood there in the quiet. He apologized for not protecting my place in the family. He said he'd been avoiding conflict instead of doing what was right. He admitted he knew something was wrong, but he didn't want to cause drama with Gloria. He said he sees now how much that hurt me. He said watching Waverly erase me was easier than having a difficult conversation, and he was ashamed of that. His eyes filled with tears again, and he asked if I could forgive him. I told him I forgave him, but I needed to see real action this time, not just words. He nodded and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He promised the photos would stay up exactly where they belonged. He said he'd make sure I was included in every family event and decision from now on. He squeezed my hand and told me he loved me and he was sorry it took him so long to understand what he'd been allowing to happen. I hugged him back and felt some of the tension I'd been carrying for months start to ease. We stood there for a minute before rejoining the party, and I noticed Gloria watching us from the doorway with a sad but hopeful expression. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Dad with a photo attached. He'd already hung up 3 pictures in the hallway before breakfast. Over the following days, more photos arrived on my phone. My graduation picture back on the mantle, the fishing trip photo in the den, my 5th birthday party in the kitchen. Each image showed the photos exactly where they used to be, like they'd never left. But Dad didn't stop there. He also sent pictures of new frames he'd bought with recent photos of us together from the past year. Dinner at my favorite restaurant, the hike we took last spring, a selfie from when he helped me move furniture in my apartment. He was thinking about our ongoing relationship, not just preserving the past. I saved every picture he sent and felt something warm settle in my chest each time my phone buzzed with a new one. 3 weeks after the party, Gloria texted asking if I wanted to meet for coffee. I agreed, and we met at the same place as before. She looked tired but determined when she sat down across from me. She told me she'd been working with Waverly on understanding boundaries and respecting family history. She admitted the progress was slow, and Waverly was resistant to acknowledging she'd done anything wrong. But Gloria said she wasn't giving up. She'd enrolled Waverly in therapy to work through her jealousy issues and her fear of not being enough. Gloria apologized again for not noticing sooner and promised she was committed to addressing her daughter's behavior, even if it meant difficult conversations every single day. I thanked her for trying and told her I appreciated her honesty about how hard it was. We talked for over an hour about blended families and how complicated it could be to honor everyone's place in the new structure. 3 months passed, and I found myself back at regular Sunday dinners with healthier boundaries in place. Dad made consistent effort to include me in conversations and decisions. He asked my opinion on things and made space for my voice at the table. The photos stayed up and nobody touched them. Waverly and I weren't close and probably never would be, but we'd reached a civil place where we could exist in the same room without tension. She didn't talk over me anymore, and I didn't feel the need to prove my place in the family. I'd learned to advocate for myself without waiting for someone else to fight my battles. I'd learned that speaking up wasn't cruel or selfish. It was necessary. That strength I'd found when I decided to make the photo album felt like the real gift I'd given myself. Not just the recognition from my family, but the knowledge that I could stand up for what mattered to me even when it was uncomfortable. I drove home from dinner that night feeling lighter than I had in years, knowing I'd reclaimed my place in my father's life on my own terms.